Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this first afternoon panel on regional security in the North. And we will see how our panelists will define the North. I am Svante Cornell. I'm director of the Institute for Security and Development Policy here in Stockholm, among other things. And I'm your moderator today. Since we have a 1-hour panel only, I won't spend an excessive amount of time presenting our panelists. They are well described in the speakers' biographies in your little booklet, but we will proceed in the order listed in your program. That means we will begin with General Karlis Neretnieks, who happens to be formerly associated with my institute. I'm glad to see him here. Who, of course, is a former, one of his main items in a long career is to have been the president of the Swedish National Defense College. He will be followed by Charly Salonius-Pasternak, who is a security policy analyst at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. And finally, last but not least, Mr. Ståle Ulriksen, who is a researcher of international politics and sea power, no less, at the Norwegian Naval College in Bergen, as well as affiliated with the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs. So without further ado, I'll hand the floor to General Neretnieks. Please.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. And thank you for inviting me. Listening to the earlier discussions and also participating in another conference, we are very good at describing what's going on, but we seldom draw any conclusions from it. And I'll try to draw some conclusions of developments in the Baltic Sea area. To begin with, Sweden's very limited military capabilities and its non-alignment policy is a threat to stability in this region. And I'll try to explain why. The deployment of Russian air defense systems on the Baltic borders and also ground-to-ground missiles will make it extremely hard for NATO to support the Baltic states in case of a crisis or even a conflict. And it will be very hard to support the Baltic states from Central Europe. It will be too dangerous. Therefore, NATO's possibilities to help the Baltic states or to make it credible that they can support the Baltic states will very much depend on the use of Swedish territory or Swedish airspace. It could also be a question of basing units in Sweden. And it's quite obvious really why, because let's take an example. Flying from the UK in support of the Baltic states will give you a certain number of sorties. Basing in Sweden would approximately double the number of sorties that could be flown. What more, considering NATO's diminishing assets in Europe and also the US presence in Europe, it becomes more and more important to be able to use these assets as efficiently as possible. This, of course, has not escaped Russian planners. By borrowing just small parts of Swedish territory and deploying similar systems that they today have in Kaliningrad on Swedish soil, it would become extremely hazardous for NATO also to use Swedish airspace or Swedish territory. That means that for all practical purposes, the Baltic states would be cut off from the rest of Europe. The Baltic campaign, if we call it that, might be won even before it started. With Sweden's very limited capabilities to defend even the most important parts of its territory, this, of course, becomes a very tempting option for any Russian planner, especially in the early stages of a serious crisis or a conflict. I might even say it's possible that Sweden would be the first target before anything else happened. You have all heard about this 1 week defense that the Supreme Commander mentioned or commented on during the Christmas holidays. I won't comment very much on that, but I would like to stress one thing. This 1 week defense of a small part of Sweden against a limited attack assumes 10% increase in the Swedish defense budget. And that is, I would say, quite an optimistic assumption. This leads to some conclusions. Swedish security and the conclusions, sorry. Swedish security and the security of the Baltic states are intimately interconnected. You can't escape from that. Sweden's ability to defend important parts of its territory is crucial, both for Swedish security and NATO's possibilities to support the Baltic states. Of course, Swedish membership of NATO would solve quite a lot of these problems. I would say that's the only realistic option for us if we want to be part of the security establishment, or whatever you call it, in the Baltic Sea area. Many of the speakers, a bit surprisingly, have excluded the notion of Russia using military force or military means to achieve or to promote its interest here in the Baltic Sea region. The truth is that no one knows. We don't know. We can assume, we can hope, but we don't know. And somehow we tend to forget that our own actions can influence what's going on. We can influence the future by our own actions. What Russia might do or not do might also depend on what we are doing. So to conclude, Sweden's present security and defense policy does not contribute to stability and security in this region. On the contrary. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karlis. Charlie, the floor is yours.
Thank you. While I walk here, I can start by saying that I'm going to start a slightly broader security perspective, but I'm going to get into the very nuts and bolts of hard security towards the end. I had to show this picture first, not because I'm a representative of the Finnish government, quite the opposite. Some members of the Finnish government wish I didn't have the position I have. But this is just in one picture to show that the idea of a broader security perspective is not new in Finland. The picture is from the most recent strategy with its core things that are important to society and who's responsible for it. This focus is probably at least half a century old in Finland. Big difference, though, is that during the Cold War, we talked about how the rest of society could support the military. It's actually been rotated around. The expectation increasingly is how can the military show its value in other situations than a large-scale war, which is seen as unlikely. But I don't think you could find one Finnish politician that would rule it out or would even suggest that you don't need defense forces in Finland. We were asked to mention the single most important security issue around the Baltic Sea today. And from a societal security perspective, complete dependence on electricity and communications networks, economic pressures, stresses on our social fabric. Sweden has seen them in the last week or so. Finland sees them, and so on. But they're not related to the Baltic as such. So if I had to pick one of those, from a societal security perspective, I would say a large chemical oil spill in southern coast of Finland. From a more traditional security or defense perspective, I would say the same thing that pretty much everyone who's talked on this has said today, which is the increasing imbalance in the military capabilities. We're also asked to then comment quickly on if these are being dealt with the appropriate way. The first one, I'd say yes. There are better and better cooperation mechanisms, better technical solutions, and better equipment. Maritime situational awareness, which started between Finland and Sweden, SUKFIS became SUKBAS, has Baltic countries in it. We're trying to get Russia into this, but we'll see what happens. Exercises, Belix Delta last year, ensures that these different actors also get a chance to train. Their technical solutions, Boris 2, Baltic Oil Response Information System, sounds very boring. It effectively means that you don't have to try to walk someone with a map to say, here's where this many tons of oil are expected to have come out, here's where this many. You can simply see the data and information, making it much easier to, well, try to collect it before it reaches the shores. And there are new ships. This one, newest Finnish Louhi. It's actually an excellent example of cooperation within the government. This was funded by Syke, which is Finland's environmental institute. It's painted in gray, which is most of the Finnish naval ships, because it's operated by the Finnish Defense Forces. It does oil spills, chemical spills, towing. It has pretty good ice-breaking capabilities, and it lays mines, which is fairly useful from a military perspective also, because in a crisis situation, you don't necessarily have to say what you're doing with it. Now, from an environmentalist perspective, we still need at least 6 of these, just for the little slice of coast of southern Finland to be remotely protected. Okay, Baltic Sea. Well, Finland has a different perspective than Sweden. Sweden effectively is, well, we're divided by the Baltic Sea. Norway has a Baltic Sea perspective, but only in so far as it's part of the Nordics. Finland kind of has 2 different perspectives. Militarily, defensively, is obviously a land perspective. But the Baltic Sea is our lifeline. So from a societal security perspective, any discussion about the Baltic Sea security is a discussion in Finnish security and defense. Over 90% of our trade goes through the Baltic Sea. That means free access and passage to the Baltic Sea is central for anything in Finland to work. To the end, I was going to explain to you quickly why I've taken to describing Finland's security challenges in 4 animals. You may see them as I click through them at the end, but I'm actually going to engage in a discussion that was started in the morning, which is about US thinking and actions in Europe. I argue that the US thinking regarding how to provide or secure Europe has changed. There's a realization that NATO is not the only actor, organization, or non-member state through which you can improve Europe's security. And the second one is any country that's willing to develop capabilities that also serve military capabilities, that also serve US interests, US is ready to do it. This is one example, but I'm talking about US sale of JASM, Advanced Cruise Missile, think of it as such, to Finland. The US has sold these missiles to, well, itself, Australia and Finland. No one else in the world. No NATO members. This should lead most people to think this wasn't just done randomly or because the US was feeling generous. This is where I'm getting at. The US sees there's a great benefit to Finland. Effectively, we can strike our potential adversary at depth. Someone, when I published this, challenged me and said, why didn't I also have a line on this side? We could strike Stockholm, but I didn't think it was that necessary. We don't need the advanced missiles for that. So that's one. I mean, Russia turns on its most advanced air defense systems, and you can't fly in Finland. Pretty serious. But it wasn't just for Finland. There's another perspective, and this will be the last actual slide. This is a map, by the way, of how NATO has expanded, which also gives some perspective. But if you're sitting right around here, so you're the NATO Supreme Allied Headquarters Commander and the US General, you have a problem, which is how do you defend that flank? Especially since we Finns are so unwilling to join NATO. Well, the part-time solution is we sell them weapons which pretty much in all but extreme large-scale war scenarios guarantees that Finnish territory will not be used against NATO or Western European EU interests. So the US general, by agreeing to sell these weapons, has just solved a defensive problem. And Finland didn't need to join NATO. So that was my intervention to discussion this morning, and now you will quickly actually see the animals that I was going to talk about. All right. Thank you very much.
As I let Mr. Ulriksen take the floor, I'd like to let you know that there is a smokingly fresh policy paper here, published by the Stockholm Free World Forum by Mr. Ulriksen, known as Balancing Act, Norwegian Security Policy, Strategy and Military Posture, which I believe is available in hard copy at the back of the room for anybody who might be interested. Thank you.
Thank you for the commercial. I'm honored to be here. Thanks for the invitation. I'm going to present security perception as seen from Norway. I should underline that I've also been a member of the last Norwegian Defence Commission, and I'm also presently a member of the Norwegian Security Commission of the MFA, but today I'm just here on my own. This is what Norwegian security is about. As you can see, the Mare Nostrum, the sea that we claim, is 7 times the size of the land area. This is what Norway lives of: oil, gas, fish. In addition comes shipping, maritime industries, and so on. Norway is a maritime nation. And that decides a lot of our security policy. This includes not only a very national focus. We want, of course, to be able to have these waters for eternity, but we also recognize that if it had been possible in 1910 or 1930 or even 1950 to get the oil up from the North Sea, Norway would not get a single drop. We would be likely to provide cheap labor to the most powerful maritime nation, Great Britain, US, or whatever. We have gained control over these areas because of the steady development of international law, the law of the sea. That means that Norwegian welfare today builds on global, highly developed international society. It is always possible that international regimes can erode. That's one of our main interests, is to support those international and global regimes. Not to be nice, not because we have nice values, but also to secure our very hard interest at sea. We are focused on the high north. With improvement of technology, melting of the ice, it becomes possible to get hold of the oil and the gas in the north. A very large amount of the yet undiscovered oil and gas resources are believed to be in the Arctic. We have part of it, not all. If you see the area around Spitsbergen Islands, that is our last remaining territorial problem. Norway claims that Spitsbergen is part of the continental shelf, and that the waters around Spitsbergen therefore belongs under pure Norwegian jurisdiction. Spitsbergen in itself is regulated by an international treaty of 1920 that says that any state that signs the treaty will be allowed to do commercial activities there. And most other states, they will say that, no, Spitsbergen doesn't, or the waters around Spitsbergen, the 200 miles, should not belong to Norway as such, but to Spitsbergen. Therefore, everyone who likes to exploit this area should be able to do so. That's a conflict. The only two countries that support us are Finland and Canada. None of the rest, none of our allies. Even in 2007, Great Britain put together a big conference on Spitsbergen without inviting Norway, and that of course created a havoc. Norway is staunch supporter of NATO. It has to be. The way we have developed our military forces since the end of the Cold War, really since 2002, is that we have maintained most of the Air Force, most of the Navy. We're even expanding both the Air Force and the Navy. We have reduced the army to almost nothing. We believe that we do not believe that an invasion is something we should fear as long as we are members of NATO and as long as NATO is credible. Is it? I mentioned if you take a look at NATO now, Great Britain here used to be the strongest maritime nation in the area, has the smallest fleet that it has since Henrik VIII, I think. We are back to 1500 something. Dutch fleet reduced to almost nothing. We haven't seen an American carrier in this area since 1992, I think. Very little presence. It is so that in order to have a military credibility, you need to have the ability as such, you need to have the equipment, but you also need to be interoperable. You need to exercise together. If not, it's not quite credible. And if something should be credible, you also need to believe in it for yourself. In 2011, we solved the last dispute over the border with Russia, the sea border with Russia. That was a big relief, because we had envisioned that that could be an area where we might have a crisis, and we would have to be prepared to handle that crisis on our own. So the Norwegian defense system is built to handle a crisis on our own, although limited in time and space, but that is the goal. We don't trust smarter defense enough to give up control of our arms. Last year, the German defense minister suggested that we should build a common submarine fleet in the North Sea. Norway said, no, we want the control of our own submarines. Why? It's simple. For us, submarines is deterrence. We have a great cooperation with Russia in many ways. The fisheries in the north are successfully regulated by treaty between Norway and Russia. In many ways, we have common interest. That's only one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is gunboat diplomacy, military posting, flights down the Norwegian coast with bomber aircraft, at least 1 or 2 a week, simulating cruise missile attacks on Norwegian cities and so on. That is the day-to-day business of things. Every time we send up F-16s to intercept them. So that it's kind of, if Europe is a highly regulated park with a real security community, it's like war would be unthinkable between the Scandinavian countries or between us and the rest of Europe. But war is not unthinkable in the High North. The High North is still very much if Europe is a postmodern thing, then the High North is still a very modern thing, and Russia acts like a very modern state. It used military means to display its political power, its political aims. If we had been too weak, we would be pressured by military means. Having submarines means that it's probably better to negotiate with us than to push us. Also, the fact that none of our allies really support us on this policy means that we need to be autonomous. That does not mean that we don't need NATO. We contribute all we can to NATO, because the security policy as such would not be credible without NATO. But it's and regarding the security of the Baltic states, if the Baltic states were attacked, Norway would support it. Absolutely. Again, not to be nice, but because we need NATO to be credible with the means that we have. Also, the Northeast Passage is something that is very important. I'll talk about that very soon. Cooperation with Russia. I mean, there's a lot of working cooperation, but there's no real deep trust. We have had a lot of incidents that could have developed up to a crisis. But we needed, both we and the Russians, our interests are best served in a quiet area. But what happens if someone else moved into the Spitsbergen area and drills for oil? That would destroy the status quo of the area. We would have a situation that we would need to be able to handle. That's a very real thing. That means that a crisis can break out, not just 10 years from now, but soon. This is the world's, as you can see, you probably read about it, traffic along the Northeast Passage is increasing. A tremendously increased interest from China, from South Korea, Japan, even Singapore and India. They're all establishing research stations in the north, Spitsbergen. There's also another truth with this picture. The US is repositioning to Asia. We've heard that several times today. What does that mean? It's not just a moving, a kind of exercise to move out military equipment. It means that the US will be focused on Asian conflicts. I don't think it's unlikely with a war in Asia during the next decade that involves both the US and China. What does that mean for us, all of us here? It means that since Russia and the US both are Asian powers, whatever happens in Asia will do something with the relationship between the US and America. If the US should have come into a war with China, if Russia supports China, then we have a new Cold War on our borders. On the other hand, if the Americans can convince the Russians to support them in Asia against China, what would be the price for Russian cooperation? What would the Russians ask in return? That's a real question. Norway will do whatever it can to have a very good and working relationship with the US. Next year we are going to send a frigate probably to the Pacific. We want to exercise with the Americans, but it's still in the back of our heads. This is changing the things, the way things have worked for a very long time. So that Norway is a Nordic nation, but it's not a Baltic power. We are not interested in the Baltic Sea as such. Norwegian involvement in the Baltic Sea has been always a trade. We have wanted Swedish and Finnish cooperation in the High North. If so, we will contribute in the Baltic. Russia is important for us, but NATO is more important. Yeah. Broad range of military capabilities. You can contrast Norway with Denmark. Denmark has designed their forces to be able to contribute as much as possible to NATO. And they say that we have no scenario there where we will operate on our own. We have a different thing. We hope to be able to operate on our own. Yeah. We are investing a lot. Norway will buy 56 F-35 aircraft. We will be one of the states that buys most of them, probably. Not only because, as you probably know in Sweden, that we prefer the technical things. Of course there's a political link. The thing over there, ugly ship, that's a spy ship. An intelligence vessel that continuously follows every Russian exercise in the High North, every movement. we are using a lot of money on intelligence. Our belief is that if we are the best informed of what is going on up there, we have some control on developments. The CV90 Archer, symbols of Nordic cooperation, important, bought from Sweden last year. Norway has built a new fleet of frigates. As you can see, there's a new one and the old one. We have fewer vessels than we used to have, but we have increased the tonnage. The fleet is much larger. All these are new investments. Submarines will be the next large investment. And my friend, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Espen Barth Eide, said when he was in the Ministry of Defense that we will close down the submarine fleets over my dead body, he said. And I mean, he underlines the importance that we need to have something that have a deterring effect. Let's see, we need that kind of negotiation power. Back again. We don't expect a quiet ride in the north. There will be a crisis. There will be a lot of influence from what is going on in Asia that will hit us in the north. Not necessarily an armed conflict, but crisis, disputes, and those kind of things. And also, to underline that, we depend on the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Seas. If you follow the news from Asia, you can see that most of the conflicts is about the ownership, right to ownership of sea territories between Japan and South Korea, Japan and China, China and Vietnam, China, Philippines, and so forth and so on. It means that the very international regimes that we depend on are threatened in Asia, and we haven't even started to debate what does that mean for our security. Well, if a war breaks out in Asia somewhere over those kind of questions, should we send forces? Should we participate? If the UN or the US ask us to participate, and if those questions are over things that we strongly depend on, can we say no? And what does that mean for the future development of our forces? Thank you.
Thank you very much to the three of you for these very interesting and in some ways contrasting pictures of the respective countries. I am sure that there is a good number of questions from the audience. Yes, Mr. Osland. Yes.
Yeah, I would like to ask about the last speaker here about the North Sea route. I hear the Russians say that it will be fully navigable this year. What does it mean? In order to pass there, do we have a clear view of what the ground looks like underneath? What ships that can pass through? Russia has excellent icebreaker services. Will that mean that Russia will own this? That will it be on international waters, or will it be so close to Russia so that it will be Russian territorial waters? Thank you.
Yeah. As of yet, it's only possible to sail for a few months each year. And what we have seen the last couple of years is that the number of ships going through are steadily increasing, but it's still under 100 ships a year. Problem with the ice breaking up is not that it doesn't just melt into water. It fragments into smaller pieces that drifts, and each of those smaller pieces may be a threat to commercial ships passing by. So would need an escort of a Russian icebreaker to do that. China's position is that the Northeast Passage should be defined as an international strait, like the Suez Channel or something like that. And that would mean that Russia loses its ownership of it. Of course, Russia is very keen on defining this as territorial waters and having the passage within Russian waters, because that would